Here we go. We are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to WiiL2B podcast with your host.
It's me, Yifa. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on WiiL2B. Tonight, I have Damon Brown joining us, and I am so excited that he's here. Before I get into the introduction about who he is and what we're going to be talking about, I'd like to just give you an overview of how the podcast works. We are going to be talking casual conversation. I'd love for you to add comments and questions based on what we're conversing about. Also, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and pass this on to your friends and family so that they can get these tips and tricks from being extraordinary and how to do these extraordinary things. Thank you so much, Damon Brown, for being with me. I want to tell everybody a little bit about who you are. You are a multipreneur, which is really exciting to me because I feel like I am too. You're a 4-time TED Talk speaker, which is very impressive, and a best-selling author and a coach. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming to be here on my podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate being here. Yeah.
Awesome. So I want to start off by getting to know you a little bit. As everyone knows who's been following this podcast on my journey, this is episode number 12. And I really love to dig into where people come from. Like, what is their journey to get to where they are, to being this ordinary person doing extraordinary things? So give us the lowdown. How did you get here?
No pressure, right?
Exactly.
I appreciate it. As you know, I've been watching your show for a while, so I know the deal. I'm originally from South Jersey, Atlantic City. 2 parents, both African-American, and they were very young. And so my parents actually split up around the time that I was almost a toddler, I want to say. So like 9, 10 months old. So pretty rough in that aspect. My mom ended up getting remarried or married later on to a person that became my stepfather. And we moved from South Jersey to Ohio, lived there for a spell. And then I grew up in Michigan, specifically Lansing, Michigan, which is the capital that no one knows about.
It's also really close to where I live, actually.
See, there you go, right? See, I appreciate that. And then went to school in Detroit, Open University, went to Northwestern for my grad school, which Yifa already knows about. And then met my partner there, ended up moving to New Orleans and left with Hurricane Katrina, which is, it's an intense week. Yeah, so left with Hurricane Katrina. Luckily, my folks are good down there. And then spent probably about a dozen years up and down the California coast. My wife's a pediatrician, so she was doing a lot of internships and things of that nature. Did a fellowship up at Stanford. We settled down in San Diego, ended up having 2 kids, moved to the Midwest for a spell, and now we're settled down in Las Vegas. In that interim, I ended up doing 2 startups. The second one got really popular. My 26th book is about to come out in a few months, and been primary caretaker of my 2 rambunctious boys who are 8 and 5. And now, as you mentioned, my main thing is helping what I call non-traditional entrepreneurs. So people who are side hustlers, people who are solopreneurs, people who don't look like or act like the people I met in Silicon Valley when I was a reporter there as a journalist. So they don't look like Mark Zuckerberg. They don't act like, the patron saint, Steve Jobs. They don't fit in a particular box. They're women. They're people of the LGBTQ community. They're people of color. I've coached hundreds of people at this point. I'm super proud of that work, more so than, having my startup be sold several years ago. It's that power of what Ava DuVernay says is not trying to get a seat at the table, but trying to make her own table.
Hey, trying to make our own table. Yes.
And I talk about that in my latest Build From Now. It's like, that's one of the opening quotes. It's like, we need to be making our own table. And it's not necessarily just for people of color, but it's also for people, again, the LGBTQ community, people who have been marginalized. It's like, we have enough power and we just need to harness it. And I've been fortunate enough, like you said, to be a 4-time TED speaker. Been fortunate enough to do my 2 startups. Second one got really popular. You know, I'm really fortunate, and I'm trying to play, as I always say, play Prometheus and get the fire from the gods and then pass it out to everybody else. So that's my intention. That's where I'm from.
I mean, there's so much I want to go into, because I mean,
Okay.
I mean, first of all,
I'm down.
What an impressive story. What an impressive story. But when you just said taking the fire from the gods and Prometheus, it reminded me of our first conversation. You and I know each other from an entrepreneur group that we belong to together. And I asked you to have a conversation because I wanted to get to know you more. And I said that your work is a little bit like Cliff Notes. And you were like, no.
No. Especially, I have 2 degrees in journalism, master's in magazine publishing. Yeah, Cliff Notes is like, and you might be right, but it's just, you know, no. So you're gonna get me on a rant again. It's not even that it's Cliff Notes. No disrespect to Mr. Cliff. I forget his first name. His first name might be Cliff, but I forget his last name. No disrespect to Cliff Notes. It got a lot of people through stuff. For me, it's kind of the opposite of Cliff Notes. And this might have been what we talked about, where it's more like, I want to be more productive. Again, I'm a coach, so people come to me. It's like, I want to be more productive. It's like, okay, so what's your priority? Well, I don't know. Or it's, well, this is my priority, and so is this, and so is this. But the Greek word for priority, I think in Greek, I learned this from the book Essentialism by Greg McEwen. I think it's somewhere over here on my shelf. The Greek origin of the word priority means the one. So you're not meant to have like 50 million priorities. So if you're not being productive, it might be because you're not focused on that one thing that's important. But you know what I mean?
To the choir.
It's okay. Look, listen, it's all of us. It's all of us. Zero judgment. Like, it's all of us. It's a matter of like recognizing that and then making a choice. When I'm on the road, particularly pre-pandemic, when I'm on the road doing a TED Talk, or, you know, I'm speaking at a conference or I'm keynoting or something, I can't be a parent because I'm not here. Yeah. So that has to be my priority, right? When I'm here, I'm not on the stage, so my family has to be my priority. I learned that from mentors back in the day. That's that choice that we're often not willing to do. And so that's what I mean by the Cliff Notes thing. It's more like kind of the opposite of that, where it's like, no, like, I'm not giving you a hack to be more productive. I'm going to push you a little bit and say, okay, it's not a matter of you being more productive. It's more like, let's get your priorities clear. And then once you get your priorities clear, then suddenly your productivity is going to go up. I think that's how I ended up becoming a coach, where I realized I was giving people productivity hacks and how to do time management, how do I, you know, lead a family and also lead, at the time it was the number 1 app in the world. How do I do both of those? And I was trying to get them that surface level, for real. I was trying to give them the surface level, and I was like, wait, no, it's not working. No, it has to be about priorities. It has to be about intention, which I think you and I talked about. It has to be about intention. It has to be the name of my show, like Bring Your Worth. Like, it has to be about understanding your self-worth. And then suddenly these other things start to get aligned. And I think we tend to be very surface. Facts, right? We tend to be very surface. And it's like, oh no, if I split my day up into 20-minute segments, then I'll be more productive. And it's like, that will help, but if you don't feel like what you're saying is worthwhile, then it's not going to matter. You can have all the hacks in the world, but if you don't believe your voice matters, hacks aren't going to get you there. Yeah. And that's what I learned on my own journey as far as doing my own books. This is my own personal.
How do you get somebody to feel like their voice matters? I mean, that seems like a tall order.
It is. I think the first thing is realizing that other voices aren't more important. I think that's the number 1 thing among many. See, I'm messing up the priorities here, but I think the number 1 thing would be understanding that other voices don't matter more. Right. So, when I was in Silicon Valley, I lived there for like 3 years while my wife was doing her fellowship at Stanford. And I'd be in these rooms, couple of those rooms actually had Steve Jobs in there. So I was able to be in his presence and all that.
Wow.
And it's like, well, what's the straight nerdy white guy have to say? What's he have to say? It's like, oh, I'm going to fund his startup. And of course, I'm being cynical here, but I saw it regularly as a reporter and other stuff I was doing in Silicon Valley. But what about, the Asian woman over here who's part of the LGBTQ community, who's from Iowa? She has no input. Her voice doesn't matter, but yours matters more. And so with the argument of things being a meritocracy, I always screw up that word. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. But things being a meritocracy, right? And it's like, well, everything's even here. It's just based on merit, hence meritocracy. It's like, well, no, not quite, because these voices are being valued more than these other ones.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the discussion. And so what I'm trying to do with, the many books I've written over the last few years, the conversations like now that we're having, again, the Bring Your Worst show, the keynotes, like everything, it's from this baseline of saying, no, all voices need to be heard. And when other voices, I open I'll show you the new book built now. I open it with talking about how for us, and I mean us as far as people of color, particularly African Americans, the same relatives, my dad, my stepfather, my mom, and then their generation above that, my grandparents, who I was lucky enough to get to know before they all passed, they were all entrepreneurs in their own right. But it was within these confines. Like I write about this again in Build From Now, where I just call him my step grandfather, but he's just my grandfather to me. My grandfather Howard, down in North Carolina and Raleigh-Durham, he would have speakeasies, right? That was his thing.
Yes.
I mean, he was born in the late 20s, early 30s. So you think about the 40s and the 50s, when he was probably 21. I'm assuming it was before he was 21, but assuming he was 21. And it's like, where else can African-American, probably mostly men, but where can African-American men and women safely have a drink, congregate, kind of like the modern version of like the barbershop and other places where African-American, particularly African-American men, have their social time. The juke joint, probably at one of those joints, whatever. It was because of the nature of that time. It was just like a decade or two after the Tulsa bombings, and he's in the Deep South, right? And he's a Black man with a young family. It's like, so he was doing those things because they fit the vibe of the time. And he was doing those things because that's what the culture needed. But it was only so far he could go.
There was a ceiling that he hit. Yeah.
Ceiling isn't even the word, right? Right. And yeah, I've heard you talk to some of your relatives on the show, so you know what I'm talking about. Like, it's not even a ceiling. It's like, it's patted down. It's an active ceiling, like where you're being pushed down. That's different than a ceiling. It's like, no, it's active.
Right. It's like a hammer.
Yeah, that's not a ceiling. No, it's something else. It's not a ceiling, no. And then for my fathers and my uncles as well, who I'm close to, then they had more of a ceiling. For me, I have my show, Bring Your Worth. It's at youtube.com/BrownDamon. Or you can just go to damonbrown.net and you'll find a link on there. Build From Now, my latest book was coming out. I was like, I'm going to start a show. I got 150 episodes. No one's stopping me. It's like, why doesn't everyone else know this? Yifa's going to start a show. You just finished your season. You understand what I'm saying? Like, there's so much power that we have. And it's like, we're still waiting. We still got the energy. No disrespect to my relatives that have passed away. We still have that energy of our relatives 2-3 generations ago. In fact, they're literally above me, right? But it's like 2-3 generations ago, we still have the energy of them. And it's like, but we're in a different time. So again, that's why Ava DuVernay is one of my heroes. When she said that, I was like, That part. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And again, it speaks to like this whole thing of like, I'd like to backtrack a little bit to that like nurture versus nature, because it is interesting that you come from a line of entrepreneurs and here you are generations later and you're a multipreneur. So you aren't just doing one business. You didn't just have like the speakeasy, but you have the multiple books that are creating income for you while you're sleeping. You know, you have the app that you co-created and sold, you know, and you have your TEDx speaking, and then your coaching, and you have all these, you've built this platform for yourself, like you said, as opposed to waiting for someone else to give you a platform. And I think that's really impressive, but I think it also speaks to maybe a little bit about where you came from. You know, the people who were before you, who kept going and said, okay, I'm going to have the speakeasy. I'm going to have the whatever. And as you said, you listened to my, you know, couple of episodes with my family, and my great grandfather was owned a barber shop and was a landowner, you know, and they were almost like the resident bank in their town because Black people couldn't go to a white institution and get a loan. So he and my great grandmother provided loans for local people. You know, his mother was a caterer and ran basically something similar to like a McDonald's, but in a bakery form, like a delicatessen type thing.
Oh, wow.
We created our industries because we couldn't be inside of white businesses and white society. And I think in some ways, my mother and I have had this conversation about how we, and as people of color, have gotten stuck in some ways with integration, trying to get a foothold in the door, but we've lost sight of creating the spaces for ourselves. And so I love this conversation that you're bringing up about creating the spaces for yourself. And I'm curious, how do you coach people to go away from the direction of like knocking on the door and saying, can you let me in? But like creating that space for themselves.
Oh, you're talking right. You're talking my language right now. Yeah, no, really, that's like a tenet of my coaching practice. So I appreciate you identifying that. One of the biggest things that I've been talking to my clients about recently, I just did a few videos about it on the Bring Your Words show, is getting from the space of renting the land to owning the land.
Oh.
Right? So like, Aoife, you own this show. So if you, I don't know if you play instruments. If you suddenly want to bring out a guitar, you want to play guitar, you can do, you know, I do a few different things. We just start doing that right now. But you know, NBC is not going to be like, nah, Aoife, that's not going to work. Right. Facebook isn't going to say, no, you can't do that on here. You can't do that. You know, Twitter's not going to get you, you know, shadow banned, as they call it, shadow banned on their algorithm, and nobody can see your stuff. That's not going to happen. You have as much independence as you can get without having your own, literally your own TV network. That's, again, I admire that because I have my own show too. The more we can get towards that, the better. Now, there's definitely many facets of my coaching practice. I talk about that in Build From Now, but that's a huge facet that we're talking about with all my clients right now, where it's just like, listen, like how's your email newsletter? You know, how's that podcast going? How's your YouTube channel going, or whatever platform you happen to be broadcasting on? That's yours. My books, which I forgot to mention, my books are independently published. So I have a new book coming out called Career Remix: How to Get the Gig You Want Based on the Skills You've Got. That's actually a partnership with Sterling Barnes & Noble. Oh. That partnership came because my books independently became bestsellers. So
you didn't knock on that door; they knocked on your door.
No, sir. You know, and obviously we're cool because I'm saying the quiet part out loud. You know, but I think it's important to understand that. Where I did, again, Career Remix is going to be a 26 book. It's going to be out on January 11th. Again, you go to DamonBrown.net and you find the link to that. And My first, this sounds crazy, but my first 18 books were with traditional publishers. And then at a certain point, which we can talk about that for 20 minutes, but I will spare you, they weren't seeing the vision. And I was like, and I talked to my agent, who I respect, and I was like, you know what? They don't get it. They don't get it. So then we took the book out of circulation because you had to send a book proposal. So we took the book out of circulation. We're like, nah. And then about 6 weeks later, I self-published it. It became top 10 on Amazon.
Whoa.
Wait,
Which one is this one?
This is the original one, but it's the Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur.
And it's a trilogy. Yes.
It's a trilogy now, but it began as one small book, which I do not have a copy of right now. It's in my closet, my other books. But yeah, so this one came out, the original version, this came out just had the 5-year anniversary. So I think it was August 5th of 2016. It became a bestseller, as you can see by the label. It became a bestseller. But that started my independent publishing journey with the Bring Your Worth publishing imprint. So when you buy Build From Now, when you buy Bring Your Worth, when you buy again Build From Now and the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which is what I was trying to think of, all those are actually through my own imprint. So
yes.
Hire my own editor, hire my own cover designers, both within the minority communities, and then they became bestsellers. So now I'm able to pass on things to them and give them shine. Yes. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's what I mean as far as, that's what Ava means, as far as like building your own table. And what I mean as far as like being a landowner versus being a renter. Because then it's like, if you want to do crops, you do crops. If you want to, raise the land, you raise the land. If you want to build a house, you build a house. If you want to partner with, Barnes & Noble and Sterling, you do that. I didn't have to ask permission for anybody except for myself. And so there's power. And so the reason why I was able to get the deal with Barnes & Noble and Sterling is because they're like, Damon's doing numbers, as they say. Damon's doing numbers without us. So he already has his audience. So let's partner with him, and then we can build an audience bigger together.
Yes.
But I still own the IP for intellectual property, right? For all the stuff that I've done so far, right? So it ends up being this beautiful symbiosis, a partnership. That's different than with respect to the publishers. That's different than me coming to them and saying, hey, I have this idea for a book.
Okay, can you publish it pretty please?
I'll pay you.
And can you take all of this money out to do the marketing and the promoting and the la 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 and the la la la?
Yeah, totally. And no shade towards people that have the traditional book deals. Like I had them again for years. It's just I realized that if someone buys a copy of Build From Now, they can get it through my website, signed at damonbrown.net. I have coffee mugs that my wife actually designed, so you get a coffee mug, based on my book imprint. And when I came out, or when I announced Career Remix, again, the partnership with Sterling, when I announced it a month or two ago, I had already had my email newsletter list. The people that bought Build From Now, which quite a few people at this point, which I'm super happy about, I know them. I know how to reach them. I know how to connect with them. So it's my very long way of saying that I'm able to get to higher levels because I have a direct connection with the audience. Yes. And that's the main thing I've been talking about with my coaching clients, where it's like, how are we going to get you from trying to go viral on TikTok to you taking your time and building, again, an email newsletter list, a podcast following, a YouTube channel, a newsletter, whatever that version is for you.
Yeah,
connecting. How can we build that? Yeah, and that's gonna take time. Again, like I've done 7 books in the last 5 years, but that momentum is building. That creation is creating more books. And it all feeds itself. And I would like most of us to get to that point, particularly if we're in the creative space or entrepreneurship. Not everyone's going to be a creative, and not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur, which is cool. Like that's okay. You don't have to be how I do it or how you do it. But some type of way, you mentioned passive income just in passing, some type of way to build passive income, some type of way to have something that's protected, particularly with Career Remix, which is about, again, finding the gig that fits you best.
Which I love that topic.
Thank you. My coaching has a sense of urgency now. So I've been a coach for several years. Now my books have a sense of urgency because, man, what was the last stat? Like 5.7 million people quit their jobs earlier this summer.
Oh, right. During in the middle of the pandemic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, when we hit the year anniversary of sheltering in place, I think it was like April or May, it must be 4.7 million people quit. And they said, I'm not going to get another job.
Yeah.
Why is that? So those people that quit, imagine if they had a side hustle. Imagine if they had their version of a speakeasy that they're doing on the weekends. Because I'm sure that wasn't my granddad's only job, right? He's probably doing at night, when my grandmother was taking care of my pop and my aunt. You know what I mean? Like that was, imagine if you had those side hustles. I've been very fortunate in that my career most of the dimensions of my career have been pandemic proof.
Right.
No, seriously, like it always makes me emotional. Like I'm thankful for that. Obviously I didn't know the pandemic was going to happen, but I knew that I was building something that wasn't dependent as much on outside factors.
It's not dependent on other people. It's just dependent
on other people. Yeah. Or not even, you know what? Like I would even make it more granular than that. Not even dependent on other people, not dependent on someone giving me permission.
Yes.
Like, let's get real about it, where it's like,
right,
you're going to do another book. No, we're not going to give you a book deal. I'm like, no, I'm going to write a book in the middle of the pandemic. Cool.
I got some people saying some things. First of all, Lerma said, congrats on the bestsellers. And then Jamel says, she's speaking to me, your great-grandfather, barber, and great-grandmother teacher owned a barber shop and beauty parlor and ice cream shop where young people could also listen to music and dance. And also, again, they were landowners. So I think that, again, it circles back. And what I think is so interesting, Damon, is that you and I both come from stock of entrepreneurs and side hustlers. Like I remember sitting at the breakfast table when my parents were putting together the Patterson School, which was an African-centered private school, elementary school. And I remember stuffing the flyers in the envelopes that were going out for, people to know that the school was happening. And so I think for me, some of these things that you're talking about are just a part of my being, a part of my DNA, a part of what I understand to be true. But what I love about what you're doing is you're helping people who don't have that, people who didn't grow up around this idea that, first of all, when my dad would walk in the room, there's this great story. We were moving into a apartment building in New York City, a co-op. In other places, they know them as condominiums. Right. And the decision-making board was all white. And so he walks into this room where they're deciding whether we should be allowed to move into this building or not. And everybody's sitting very tidy and stuffy in their chairs. And he comes in and he sits down on the floor. And he's like, let's loosen up here, And he's just like, I'm not asking for your permission, like I belong here and everyone loved him in the building, And that's just how my dad was. He's like, I'm not asking for your permission. I belong here and this is what's going to happen, And I think that this is something that some people have because their families pass that on. But for people who don't, having someone like you as a coach is the way to go. And I think that's just very impressive.
Thank you. No, I never thought about it like that. Yeah. And with each book that I do, even a little bit with Career Remix, but particularly with the latest one, Build From Now, I'm honest about that, where and I'm sure you went through something similar, particularly when you were younger, where you didn't realize, to use your words, you didn't realize what kind of stock you came from. You took it for granted. And right, especially when you're younger. And so there's a lot of examples that I share in my books where I'm realizing all these moments from, again, my eldest son is 8. So moments when I was like 8, moments when I was a teenager, moments when I was a young adult and I was going away to grad school, and little flickers of moments where they didn't say it directly, but these Black men and women in my life were saying, no, you do it like this. No, you do it like this. They never said it directly. Like, let me be clear. They weren't like, no, Damon, this is how you do it. They were like, no, I just watched them.
Right.
I can remember like watching my granddad like and be like, no, I'm not going to do that. He must think I'm crazy because he's breaking it down. I'm just looking like, wow, you seem really upset. And then years later, I'm like, oh, he was trying to pull one over on my granddad. What kind of insight did I get just from watching him? And so I appreciate you saying that, because that's something, and I don't know if you can relate that to that. I know for me, I took that for granted until I was much older. And now I'm like, oh, wow, you're right. Like not everybody has that.
No.
Stuff that I know instinctively, but it's from watching them for X number of years. So you're absolutely right. I appreciate you pointing that out. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I want to just take the time, if anyone has any other questions that they'd like to ask Damon, go ahead and chime in. Feel free to chime in. Lerma is asking, do you find people needing a lot of help finding time to devote to a side hustle after their regular job and family duties? That's a good question.
Yes. Yes. And I can relate to that directly. I talk about that in The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, my first like serious business book from a few years back, where I would take care of, my wife went back to work when our son was 4 months old, our first son. That was the same time I became an entrepreneur. And so I started my startup. First one's called So Quotable. And I would work from 3:15 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., my son would wake up like clockwork at 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., little man. Wow. And then my wife would get back home from work. We'd eat some dinner and, of course, pass out. I did the same thing for like 2 years. Because it was that. And then my second startup was called Cuddlr, which is one I'm most known for. It was the #1 app around the world twice. And then we ended up selling the app. Myself and my 2 co-founders, we sold the company about a year after we started, and my son was just turning 2. So it was like from when he was 4 months old to when he was 2 years old. And so I have empathy and sympathy for folks that are dealing with that. I also try to be proof of concept, where when people talk about that, me being a coach, I'm like, yeah, I hear you. And there's also ways that you can slice it up. You can do it, again, that's why it's called The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. You can do it in little pieces. You can do it in portions. There's ways that you can start. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I can share is to start with just one customer. So if you have a big idea that you're trying to do and you want to, let's say, start a daycare center, I don't know, then try to start a daycare center with that perfect person or perfect family, whatever, in your neighborhood, and start with them. It doesn't require as much of the, what they call capital, right? So it doesn't require all that capital. It doesn't require all that time, all the resources I talk about in the new book, Built From Now. It doesn't require as much of your focus, of much of your agility as far as having to adjust to different things. It doesn't require as much time, and doesn't require as much energy, which I call the 4 resources. So just start very small. There's a really good book by a guy named Peter Sims called Little Bets. And it's one of my favorite books. It probably came out, I don't know, about 10 years ago. But he talks about doing things really small and how Microsoft and Google, all the way to Chris Rock and other major comedians and other folks, create by doing things really small. They'll test a joke, at a comedy club.
Right.
Seriously,
yes,
right?
It's true. It's true.
Google will, if they used to, you could dedicate 10%, I think it was called 10% time. You then dedicate 10% of your full-time time at work doing a side project. Some of those side projects turn into Gmail and all these things that run our lives today. So there's ways that you can start small. The second part of that is at our peak with Cuddlr, we had 250,000 users. That happened really quickly. If we weren't ready for that, it would have fallen apart. Mm-hmm. Like the people that I coach and even people that I interact with at keynotes and stuff, they always say, I want to have a best-selling book. All right, are you ready for, 10,000 people to buy your book? Have you started writing yet? Can you handle hecklers from the audience? You know what I mean? I started like really small. Like some of my books sold like, 2 digits. You know what I mean? 26 books. Quite a few of them were stinkers. So it's like, and I'm proud of all of them, but some of them didn't resonate. And so that allowed me to learn the game slowly. So that's probably the biggest encouragement for everybody trying to do this side hustle. Just start slow. And then you learn the game. And then once you learn the game, then you can go to wherever you want to go. Right? I think my 13th book was a bestseller. So I'd already done it like 12 other times. So when it became a bestseller, not only was I humble about it, because I knew how hard it was, but I also had the skill set. So that would be my biggest, hopefully that helps. That's my biggest.
I think there are a couple of things that I'm thinking of. One is Seth Godin, who says, you mentioned the thing about just focus on one person. And he says like the same thing, like get that one person that loves your show or that is like, wants you to take care of their child in the daycare scenario. And I think that's just a perfect example of, just starting small, and then it grows into something bigger. I wanted to segue into your tiny pieces of paper and your TEDx talk. First of all, I think it's amazing that you've done it 4 times. There are very few people, I think, who have done it as many times as you have. I don't know what the running series of people who are like you, but
I don't know either. Yeah.
Yes. I think you're in the top of the running.
All right.
I'm really excited about that one. It resonated with me the most because and I think I mentioned this in the beginning when someone asked me, well, how did the podcast come about? And it came about because during the pandemic, I was sitting in a park and I was watching a young African-American man who was playing with his daughter who presents as white. And I said to myself, what is it like to be this man? And I went home and I wrote this down on a little tiny piece of paper. What is it like to be? And 6-7 months later, here we are. The podcast is, what is it like to be? What is it like to be Damon Brown? What is it like to be Jamel Rackley? What is it like to be whoever? And it was on a tiny piece of paper. I actually have another tiny piece of paper right in front of me. I'm working on, I don't know if this will even show up. I'm working on.
That's gorgeous. I love paper. It's gorgeous.
This is for an art project that I actually have that's going to be here in Evanston, October 2nd through November 5th with an organization called Terrain that helps make art accessible. So it's an outdoor, everything has to be seen from the sidewalk. And I'm part of the art piece is about how propaganda that white people disseminated during slavery and after slavery gets people to be able to think it's okay on how you treat Black people. And so this is a concept of a flag that I'm creating to depict some of that. And so I just am doodling on little pieces of paper. So to me, that's a long way. You and I both talked about how we're storytellers, and that's a long way around.
All right, as long as the audience is with us, y'all with us? All right, cool.
It's a long way of saying that TEDx talk really resonated with me with the tiny papers, and I'd love for you to share how that came about in becoming a TEDx talk.
Yeah, that specific talk. Yeah, so it was similar to you, where it was just what I was going through in my life. Where one of my first major books, I worked on it for about 5 years, which I was still in my 20s, so it was a long time. Feels like forever when you're in your 20s. And I remember being on a flight. I think I was in California at the time, again, post Katrina. And I think I was on a long flight going back to see my folks in Jersey or something like that. And I was on Frontier Airlines because I wasn't balling like that. So I was on Frontier Airlines. Frontier's like Spirit, if you don't know. Like a notch above Spirit, but not quite Delta. And so, and I still have it somewhere around here. You're jogging my memory. And it hit me as far as how to design the book.
Yeah. And
it was on the back of, this back in the day before they did the digital work. So, you know, they had the envelope, you know, where you put the ticket in, right?
Yes.
Back in the envelope. I still have it in my archives where I wrote like the whole design of the book. And it just hit me while I was sitting there. But you think about it, as I talk about in the, you can check out the TED Talk at youtube.com/Brown Damon. So it's part of my show now. So y'all can check out my 4 TED Talks there. And it was, what I talk about in the talk is essentially what happened to me, where I was trying so hard to figure things out. And then you think about being in a metal tube for 5 hours in a coach seat. You know what I mean? You have to be still.
Yes.
You taking a shower in the morning. What are you going to do? Wander around in the shower? I don't have a shower like that. Maybe you do, but we don't have showers. Like maybe that, I'm in Las Vegas. Maybe they have them down on the Strip where you can walk around the shower. But other than that, you're just sitting there, standing in the shower, taking a bath. You can't go anywhere. And so, so then it ends up being these little pieces of paper. It ends up being, if you're careful with electronics, ends up being like you going on the Notes app on your phone. It ends up being the scrap piece of paper I have over here. So what I talked about is all these instances through history, whether it's music, whether it's scientific breakthroughs, whatever, even in my little history, where these little pieces of paper actually end up being the catalyst for genius. But that's because we take the pressure off. As I talk about in the TED Talk too, we tend to, which kind of ties into the advice I was given earlier as far as how you start a side hustle, whatever. We tend to start with like the PowerPoint. We want to have the website with all the bells and whistles. That takes ridiculous, right? That puts a ridiculous amount of pressure on us. That little, you know, index card piece of paper that you have with the flag, it's no pressure. You can scribble it out. You can be like, I don't like this, and throw it away. It doesn't have to be perfect. I saw little stick figures on there, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. There's a beauty in that. And we put so much pressure on ourselves, particularly when it's a new idea. I guess this is really my point. Particularly when it's a new idea that's outside of our comfort zone. It's already high pressure. You know, me starting the Bring Your Worst show, I've never done a YouTube show. So it was high pressure for me, even with, you know, knock on wood, the stuff that I've accomplished. It's like, it was still high pressure. So I'm like, how can I keep it as low pressure as possible? So for the first week or two of the show, and I did the show every day for, like I told you before we got on air, I did the show every day for the first 2 months. Then I calmed down, and that was every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Then went a burnout. But for those first 2 weeks, I didn't tell anybody I had a show at all. I just did it. And then like the lighting's jacked up, and I'm flubbing my lines. And I don't know how to edit because I don't know any editing software. It's just me for the show. You know, so it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And like, I got the titles wrong, and my thumbnails, which is what you see on YouTube, are all jacked up. And then in the new year, I started telling people. And then I started to get some momentum. But that's my version of a little piece of paper. I think we think that if we don't go big in the beginning, that we're going to fail. But it's actually usually the opposite. We start little bets, you know, small risk. Side hustles are nothing more than you seeing and testing the waters to see if you might have something bigger. You know, my coaching practice began as a side hustle. Now I've coached hundreds of people. But it began as like one person in the neighborhood that wanted to get coached, literally. I wasn't like, I'm a coach now. No, small. And I think I
remembered something else that I don't want to forget. It's that there's a quote that says, it takes 10 years to become an overnight sensation.
That's right. I love that quote. Yeah.
one of my favorite quotes, because people have this, like you said, they have this idea that they've got to like go big or go hard, go, you know, or go big or go home, whatever that quote,
there's a million of them. Yeah, go big or go home. You know, winners and credit, it's just all it does is like pressure. And you know, the different things that I love the term multipreneur. I've never heard that before. So I will give you credit if I end up using that. Being a multipreneur, that wasn't like, I want to do like 10 million things. It was more like, this is where I feel like, which I think is important, this is where the audience needs to be served. I became a coach because people were asking me to coach them after they started reading my books. And they're like, let's get a cup of coffee. Do you coach? And I was like, no, I'm a writer. And then after a little while, I'm like, well, maybe that's something to follow. Yeah. And now it's a big part, obviously a big part of my private practice. But that was allowing the audience to lead me. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, I'm a coach now and I'm going to coach people. It's like, no, people were telling me to coach them.
People were asking for it.
That intention is completely different. That doesn't mean you can't have your own intentions or aspirations. Right. It's just be careful when you do that, because then you want to make sure that it's coming from a place of service, not coming from a place of ego or, you know, this title sounds good. It's like a lot of people that have done that, they haven't lasted very long, you know? So make sure your intentions are pure and then start small. And then I think when you come from there, then it becomes a little bit easier to move forward, you know?
So we are about 15 minutes away from the hour, and I would like to ask you, how are you able to balance everything? I think for people out there who are entrepreneurs or who are trying to get into starting a side hustle, or they're trying to gain leverage in the corporation that they're working for, and they're staying up at night, like you said you were doing, or they're getting up early before their children. Like, how are you balancing? Because right now, that's one of the big things that people had this aha moment during the pandemic. It's like, I don't want to overwork myself. Like, I want to have a good work-life balance, family life balance. And how do you do that? How do you create that for yourself?
I don't always create it. So let's
okay.
Knock me right off the pedestal. Like, no, having a rough week this week. Like, so it's not a consistent, you know what I mean? It's, you have those rough moments. My kids were just virtual schooling, you know, remote schooling, and I had stuff to do. So I'm with y'all in the trenches, you know, so I don't have all the answers. Let me be clear about that. I think some of the things that actually do help and help not keep the balance, but increase the chances of you having balance. I can put it like that.
Yeah.
Number one is to have a team. You got to have a team. I don't mean like hire people. I'm a one-man band. So I don't, I have some people I consult with, but I'm a one-man band. So I'm not saying you have to have a team as far as hire a bunch of people. Not saying that. Particularly if you have low resources or you're watching resources. What I mean is I have someone, if I'm trying to negotiate a new book project, I have one, maybe two people that I can call, and they can do the same thing for me. If I'm negotiating consulting or coaching, I got 2-3 people. I'm thinking of them right now. I can call right now. Like, hey, let me bounce this off you. They are my cheerleaders. They are my support network. And I call it the brain trust, right? So these people who love you for who you are, they know your real intentions. My real intentions is to support non-traditional entrepreneurs, side hustlers, solopreneurs, anyone who's trying to go against the grain, often working with limited resources, and they're trying to make a specific impact on the world. They are clear on that. I can't make you clear on your specific impact. You got to already know that. Right. When you come to me as a coach, all right, let's get it. But if that clarity is not there, we're not ready to have that conversation. That is very specific, right? I know a lot of coaches. Now everybody runs like that, right? The people that are in my brain trust, the people that support me and I support them, they know that's my intention. So if there's some wild project over here, some high paying project over here, some stuff over here that's like, that sounds enticing. They're like, well, is that what you're doing?
Right.
The intention change. What's really good? What's happening? You said a few years ago that you want to do this. Is that direction you want to go? So, so number one, having people like that. And that's through, we're with the Parentpreneur Foundation, their network. So having people like that, that's how we met. Shout out to James. You know, all the different networks that I'm a part of, that's how you build that. So connect with people. You cannot do it alone. I own my own publishing imprint. I like bootstrap two of my startups. I'm about as independent as you can get. And I'm still relying on two dozen people. You're not going to do it alone. Not going to happen.
So I love this because there are themes that are running through this podcast and the 12 episodes that I've had it. And what you just said is one of my biggest things that I've been telling my kids and people in my circle forever. And I call it a board of trustees. I say everyone needs to have their own board of trustees, you know, and I have those people that I can call on, you know, that, for instance, one of my podcast interviewees screwed up. He misunderstood the time. So they're all live. And he was like, I'm not going to be able to do it at the time that's live. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And I called my aunt up and I was like, hey, like, I need, you know, to bounce this off of you. And she's a very quick thinking type of person. So it's easy to, when you need someone to think about something quickly, she's the go-to person, you know, and we figured it out, you know, in like less than half an hour. So everyone needs to have, like you said, these people in their corner. And so I just love how these things come full circle in the people that I'm interviewing, people who are ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We all kind of have similar concepts. We may call them different things, but we have similar concepts. I just want to throw in here because Jamel has been wanting to say that there's an interesting book that she's reading called Indistractable that talks about balancing everything. It sounds like
I'm familiar with it. By a guy named Nir Eyal. So I met him a few years ago. I actually did I have a column with Inc. magazine. I did an interview with him probably about 4 years ago. But yeah, really interesting book. And that kind of, it's actually a really good sister concept to the one I mentioned earlier, Greg McEwen's Essentialism. So those are really good pairs. So I'm glad you're already reading it, Janelle. That's good. That one, follow that up with Essentialism. I think you'll be happy with that. Very good. Yeah.
Awesome. So few other things I'd like to do before we end up closing out. What is some advice that you think you could give the listeners? Like if you could tie something up in a bow for people, what would you say?
At this point, we don't have to wait for permission. Part of it is because of technology. Part of it is because the cogs and the wheels have kind of fallen off of modern culture over the last 18 months. We have a unique opportunity to rebuild things in a better way. This opportunity, this window is going to close. And so right now we have wet cement and I can see it drying. So I felt it before the pandemic. I'm really feeling it now. Feels like a lot of people are feeling it. That's hence it'll be soon 8 books in the last 5 years. Yeah. Get in the conversations now. There's something you're trying to build. Again, my last book was called Build From Now. There's something you're trying to build, do it now. Doesn't mean, run away to the circus, as I always say. It doesn't mean sell your house. It means just start. Get the web URL. Start the YouTube channel. You can go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/BrownDamon. Go all the way back to December 22nd. You will be embarrassed. Seriously, start something.
Yes.
Start something. The cement, I leave it at that. The cement is drying. So if there's some, I guess we're already cursing. If there's some shit you want to do now, it's not going to get easy.
Do it now. Yes.
Yeah. This is also kind of like my coaching. So I do curse when I coach. Just warn you, if you want to talk to me, it's going to be colorful. But do the shit now. It's not going to get easier. Also from Seth Godin, biggest thing I learned from him. whatever you're trying to do, it's not going to get easier tomorrow. We have this fallacy with that. It's double sure in 2021. Started by 2022. This opportunity, the window is closing. So just start.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, so
you've mentioned it several times, but just as a a tying of the bow.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's right there. So DamonBrown.net. That's a hub of everything. You can check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/BrownDamon. That's every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so Vegas time. And I'm talking about a lot of stuff we talked about today, which I love. We could talk for another hour about it. So I do that on my channel as well. And definitely support Yifa here. I'm up to almost 150 episodes. So you can sit there and just get as much game as possible. As my mentors say, take what you want, leave the rest.
Yes.
Feel free to enjoy it. It's a free channel. Subscribe. That'd actually be super supportive of the stuff that I'm trying to do, and share with other people that you care about. I have my latest book called Build From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World. It just came out. The deluxe edition came out about a month ago, so in July. So super proud of it. If you want to learn more about the best resources you have, which I show right here, you can take a free quiz at buildfromnowquiz.com. It takes 2 minutes, multiple choice. Enjoy it, that type of thing. And finally, I have my new book coming out called Career Remix, How to Get the Gig You Want with the Skills That You've Got. My links are available at DamonBrown.net, and I think that Yifa will be sharing that in here as well. It'll be coming out January 11th. It's my first partnership as an independent entity, so please come support it, because even though you're buying it from Barnes & Noble, you're still supporting the little guy. So I love any support that comes with it, especially if you're trying to figure out what your next step is going to be, which, as you can tell by my energy, that's what I specialize in. So let me help you on your journey.
Awesome. One thing I want to just circle back to, and you're talking about making a name for yourself and not knocking on the door. And what I'm so excited about and so proud of about this podcast is that I can do, like you said, I can do things that on CNBC would be a no-no. Like, I laugh hard and I laugh a lot, and in a regular newscast, I probably would have to be more poised and, more conservative. And I just love being free to laugh and let loose. I also have a tooth gem. That would be a no-no. All these things that make me who I am, and make the people who like me and love me for who I am. So I just want to thank you for really bringing that to the forefront and talking about that as something that's positive, because I think people sometimes shy away from believing that what they have is important to shine a light on, and they want to dim that down, and they want to be like everyone else or show themselves to be like the conservative newscaster, as opposed to having a tooth gem and crazy ear clips like I have on, and laughing crazy like I do. So thank you again.
Absolutely. One of the things I said to that I always say to my coaching clients is that, post-pandemic, of course, if we end up running into each other in Chicago, and grab a drink or a coffee, or I just did a keynote. So the keynote I did a month ago, you see me after the keynote, you see me on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/BrownDamon. I'm always the same. Yeah. And I love, like Jay-Z had said that recently, where he said, no matter what room I'm in, I'm always the same. And I think about that all the time. And so you and I are privileged in that way, where we can walk into any room, we can show up here. I'm busy cursing and,
I'll walk into a corporate event with my tooth gem and people are like,
exactly, right. Nice. I'm walking in, wearing a nice blazer and, my t-shirt about Black empowerment. And it's just like, I'm going to do the keynote and I'm going to get paid for it. And I'm going to sell some books and then I'm going to get some coaching clients. Like, we have this privilege of showing up how we're supposed to be wherever. I want all of us to recognize that. You know what I mean? Like we all have that power. It's a privilege, but it's a privilege for everybody. You know?
And that's what this show is about. And I'm really excited for next season because we're going to dig deeper into those kinds of concepts and just fleshing out how people like you and like me, who are ordinary people, just like the people who are watching the podcast, but we're doing extraordinary things, and how do we do it? So I want to say thank you, everyone, for tuning in for this entire season of season 1 and supporting me. And I want you to come back in the beginning of season 2, which will be 2022.
Excellent.
And just listen and take it in and send it to your friends and your family. And I'm just so grateful for the support this season. And thank you very much. Thank you, Damon, for joining me. And good night, everyone.
My pleasure. Take care, y'all.